We wanted a dramatic All-Ireland football semi-final weekend, and it delivered in spades. In 2 weeks' time, Armagh and Galway will contest the All-Ireland final after the Orchard County outlasted Kerry in extra time on Saturday evening, while the tribesmen had just enough for Jim McGuinness's Donegal side in Croke Park yesterday afternoon. On today's episode of the Throw-In Football podcast, we will discuss all the major talking points from the weekend just gone. I'm Will Slattery, and I'm delighted to be joined for our chat today by Dick Clerkin and Colm Keys. And Dick, in our preview last week, you did kind of make the point that football needed a good semi-final weekend, especially coming off the back of the hurling last 2 weeks ago, Cork and Limerick and Clare and Kilkenny. And I think we got that. Obviously, extra time on Saturday was very dramatic. Armagh just about winning by 2 points, and then yesterday again, right down to the melting pot, Galway getting out on the right side of another 2 point kind of narrow margin. And now we have a very novel final pairing. It feels like it was a really important weekend for football after a championship that's gotten a good bit of criticism.
It definitely was. It had everything you wanted. It had excitement. It had endeavour. I talked as well last week about, teams being brave, that should be rewarded. And I think that was definitely the case for Armagh on Saturday evening, the game that I was at. They weren't fazed by the occasion or the green and gold stripes of Kerry. And that's what you want in your big games. Now, I suppose, and as well, there's no controversy really. Like, we've had that a few unsightly things and different things have come up that takes over the narrative. So there was none of that either. It was all very, and especially yesterday, I think it was two managers and two teams who really respected themselves, left everything out there, and there was the whole John O'Mahony subtext to it all. I think that was, I didn't get down yesterday, but it felt like an even bigger occasion than the Saturday evening, which was a wee bit, say, chaotic, and the fact that there were so few Kerry people there, it almost felt like a home game from Armagh. So it was great, and that's what you want, because I think there was a time there that the football championship was just getting too predictable, not just who's going to win it, but how every game was going to go, and that's what you want as a supporter, be it a neutral or be a fan, that it's that expectation, what's going to happen next, and have it going down to the way. And we got that, and that whatever but the results and what team you're following as a game and a championship, we have to be very thankful for that.
Yeah, and over 120,000 people through the turnstiles across the 2 days, I think, tells its own story, because some of the attendances at prior matches, even some big contests, hadn't been very well attended, so that was great to see. Colm, we might start with Saturday evening and Armagh Kerry. A great extra time thriller. We were talking off air that there was kind of there was a bit of wildness to it. There was turnovers, there was wides, but it contributed to a brilliant spectacle. And ultimately, it was a landmark win for this Armagh team in year 10 under Kieran McGeeney. Like, what jumps out to you about how Armagh ultimately got over the line? Because obviously there's been penalty defeats. They haven't closed out some games that they probably should have. This time they did. What jumped out to you?
I think the ferocity that they brought to almost contesting almost every ball. There was a passage of play there around the 57th minute. I remember it for Killian Spillane, one of the Kerry substitutes, looking for a mark, even though the ball had been played inside the 45 metres. But for about a minute afterwards, there's these series of contests that break out beneath the Cusack stand. And that, for me, was the summation of this game, almost the signature of it, that both sides contested it so ferociously. And that really was the essence of this game, that, okay, there's lulls, and we have to accept there's always going to be. They play at such a pace at times, and with that physical element, that there's going to be lulls, and where you have to just take a pause and see where it is. But for a lot of this game, it was played at breakneck speed with such an intense approach from both teams. But in the end, I just felt that physical edge that Armagh had spurred on the crowd, and we'll maybe get to Jack O'Connor's post-match comments afterwards, because I think they were pointed enough with regard to the influence that the huge Armagh support had. But in the end, I thought that physical edge, and of course, there's no doubt, and it's been happening a lot for them this year, the bench impact and the structure of the bench impact that Armagh are able to spring really helped them. The point was made, maybe in advance of the semi-finals, that Armagh probably have the best squad of the four remaining teams, and I think that's true and fair, because when they start to replace players, they don't drop the levels that maybe the other teams do. They're able to keep the same levels of pace. If you're taking out, say, if you're taking out Oisin Connaughey, well, you're bringing in Ross McQuillan. If you're taking out like for like, you're putting in like for like players all the time, and that's the sign of a really, really strong. There's a very, very even spread across the Armagh team. Whereas with Kerry, I felt it dipped when they had to take out certain players, and maybe to a lesser degree the following day as well. Perhaps so with Donegal, there was a lot of changes there. So the bench was very important from Armagh. And also, I have to say, I felt the crowd too, that when the key moments came and when they were getting ahead, you could really sense it. And I'm sure Kerry sensed it too.
Yeah, Dick, it's funny, when we were doing our preview, we kind of said, there might have been a danger that the game could have unfolded like Kerry-Derry, that our man might have looked at that and said, oh, if we dig in and really limit Kerry in attack and are a little more economical and efficient with our own ball, we could maybe edge them. But it didn't turn out like that at all. It was a lot more, as you said, there was bravery from Armagh with their approach, and obviously Kerry matched that, and it contributed to a really kind of end-to-end exciting game.
It did, but it took a while. Like, I was first half, it was like Kerry were very comfortable, and even not playing at their best. Like, we'll maybe touch on David Clifford in a minute, still largely peripheral, but they were getting their scores a lot easier. Armagh certainly didn't look. They were like, for me, like Colm touched on it there, that the panels in the first half, Kerry looked every part of the Division 1 team. Armagh looked like a Division 2 team trying to get up there. By the end of the game, that had flipped. The team that Kerry finished, like, Colm, you're watching football a long time, you're following Kerry teams. It's hard to remember a poorer Kerry team finishing a game, as was the case on Saturday. And that's not to be unfair to any individual. We're benchmarking Kerry teams against great Kerry teams that win All Irelands. And I got the sense that Armagh sensed that as the game progressed, that balance tipped towards Armagh, that they were stronger, they were fitter, and they were looking at these boys going, here, there's nothing to be afraid of here. Maybe at the first half, there was an element of sort of the occasion and the team that Armagh were a wee bit uncertain, but they just grew in confidence, and Kerry's confidence on the other side seemed to diminish as players were replaced with players that just don't have that All-Ireland pedigree. And that's not through any fault of their own, but again, we're benchmarking against great Kerry teams. And I think that's the sense that I got, that Kerry looked like a very average team come the end in terms of their decision making and players when they didn't have David Clifford to call on for whatever reason. There was so few players that you could trust to have those clutch moments. And that was, to me, the winning of the game.
I think it's a team that I feel, a Kerry team that just doesn't have that pace and acceleration, and didn't bring that to the game, the counter-attack. They had opportunities. Remember one stage in whether it was the first period of extra time, Aidan Nugent was turned over at one point, and you think the counter-attack is on here if they can get the right players on the ball. And they wouldn't say they were pedestrian, but they were very, they didn't react very, very quickly. And that happened on a few occasions. And maybe they don't have the players. Gavin White could have been off the pitch at that stage. He's the one player that can really accelerate, but he wasn't doing it. And maybe he didn't get the opportunity to do it. But it's not the quickest Kerry team to make those counter-attacks. Whereas I feel Armagh have built a lot of pace into their team this year. You see the addition of Peter McGrane. He went away very early on, scored the first point. He got ahead of the ball. Oisin Connaughey didn't work out for him this time. But you're looking at players like Joe McElroy. These players that have come into the team all have pace to get ahead of the ball. And it's something Kerry weren't really trying to do in the first place, I thought, or able to do. Now, obviously, they got the counters on for the 2 goal chances that Tom O'Sullivan had in the third quarter. But generally, it wasn't done at breakneck pace all the time. And I tend to agree with you. As you went down through the bench, I thought, as Kerry were starting to take players out, they were weakening. The gradient downwards was a lot steeper than it was for Armagh. I think it told in the end. There was one cameo in the late on when Ross McQuillan went by Mike Breen. Here you have 2 subs, and just the difference again in pace. McQuillan was able to get away from Breen, score a point. And that encapsulated something about the difference in it for me as well.
Yeah, and I've mentioned it several times over the course of the year. One area that I feel Kerry were eventually found out on was around midfield. I had from that evening in Croke Park against Dublin earlier in the year when they were obliterated around the middle. I just felt I don't see an All-Ireland winning midfielder. They're going to do very well. And that's not to be unfair. Jim O'Connor actually played very well, but I think he's a better half forward. I think he's not an archetypal midfielder in terms of playing the position, a link man, distributing the ball. What all the good Kerry midfielders over the decades have done for Kerry. That sort of solid middle in terms of competing. Like they've done poorly on competed kickouts, but equally the supply into Clifford has dried up. And that long, accurate ball that Kerry and inside forwards have always tried on. There was very little of that on show, and it almost is a case of that the forwards stop making the runs knowing that it's unlikely to come in because that supply line was gone. I think Kerry have lost that in the middle in the retirement of David Moran, and I think that's something, if they're going to come back to win an Ireland, they have to solve that problem, because that was very evident as the game grew on Saturday evening.
Hey, Colm, what did you make of David Clifford? The focus has been on him a lot after the weekend. Kind of bottled up a good bit by Barry McCambridge. How much, not blame lies at his door, but how much of Kerry's inability to get over the line is stemming from that he was kind of curtailed a fair degree?
Well, it's pretty obvious that when he's on the top of his game, and it's a very high altitude that Kerry can separate themselves from most teams, and when he's not, they're back in the pack, and that is quite evident. If you look at his performances against Derry in the semi-final last year, if you look at his performance against Galway, obviously in the All-Ireland final, in the semi-final, all the big games in Croke Park, he has brought so much. Even the Tyrone game in 2021, he wasn't on for extra time. But in the last two games, I wouldn't say he's been peripheral, but he certainly has not been at that level of influence. And he's had to come out and take a lot of the ball from the centre forward position. And he hasn't even been able to get shots away. And he does have obviously a decent strike rate from there too. But I think opponents, the more they watch of him, I think he's, there's no doubt he's the most scrutinised player at the game at this stage. So they're watching him. They've done a lot of analysis of his movements. And I think that's starting to show in the way teams are defending against him. Okay, Armagh, for the most part, left Barry McCambridge one-on-one with them. But anytime Clifford had possession in a one-on-one of them, there was always someone getting to the outside. And the way that Dublin did it last year as well with Mick Fitzsimons, they were happy to leave Mick Fitzsimons in isolation until the ball, and they were very vigilant around him then, and they were prepared to commit numbers. And Armagh were prepared to commit numbers around him too. Obviously he's had some start to his career from 2018-19. Kerry only played one championship game in 2020, but he's been on it for every championship until this year. And he hasn't had a bad championship, but obviously David Clifford's judged by his own standards. And I think, he's at a midpoint of his career now, and I think there'll be a slight reset. I wonder, will he play as much club football? He certainly didn't play all the time with East Kerry last year, but I think it's the middle of July now. It's a long time around now to next January or February, and I think he'll use that time to, when you're in the spotlight a lot, it can be difficult. And there's always going to be maybe a dip in someone's career at this stage, and I'm sure the 27 and 28-year-old David Clifford will be different again to where he is now, and he'll absorb a lot from it. But it's quite clear that when he's not on it, Kerry are right back in the pack, and that's been evident in the last two games.
Yeah, Dick, just to come in to ask you a question, Dick, on Clifford, obviously Gaelic football is not a one-man sport by any means, but when he has so much influence, when he burst on the scene, he's played 7 seasons and won 1 All-Ireland, I think a lot of people would have said it would be 3 or 4, given how good he's been, or he's double footballer of the year. He's won, I think, 4 or 5 All-Stars at this stage. It's not the return I think a lot of Kerry supporters would have envisaged when he first broke in.
Yeah, and I was in the upper Dav and I took the boys to it, and I say it's such a great atmosphere. I think All Ireland semi-finals are turning into great occasions now for families and kids, and the amount of people that get to those big games that don't otherwise. There's a great spectacle up there. But from that point, you get a great viewpoint of the game. I was looking down the pitch, you could see all the movements left and right. I was taken with the lack of movement by David Clifford to the point that, is there something wrong here? Was he unwell? Has he been carrying injuries or something? Like, there was if you watch the game back, it was almost, the way they talk about Messi now, the way he walks through games and sort of picks his moments. He was very, very laboured, very, very lethargic. I'd say Barry McCambridge couldn't believe how little movement he actually had to track. But that's a combination of Clifford having to get into the game, make the move, but also Kerry find a way to induce a bit of energy into play. Like, I scarcely remember too many long 50-50 balls, Colm, being put in. And there was plenty of times that they were isolated in there just to mix it up a bit. By comparison to even Galway, we'll get to them in a minute. Remember a few times yesterday you could see Dylan McHugh, we're just going to fire it in here to see what happens, just to keep the Donegal defence thinking, don't make it comfortable for them. Kerry never hardly tried that once. Now, that you have to ask the question, why not? Like, he's as good a man to field the ball one-on-one. You put in 3 balls there, he's getting at least one of them. They never even tried that. You have to ask the question, why? Because that went on for not just 70 minutes, but then another 20 minutes in extra time. And nobody has written more in favour of David Clifford than me, and I done it after last year's All-Ireland final. And I was sitting on the edge of my seat shouting to myself, will you run for the ball, go looking for it? There was something not right, to the point, as you're right, Colm. Like, look at, he's put himself through for club, county, and not just for Kerry seniors. 2 years previous with all our minors. It's a phenomenal workload and pressure he's been on, and it just looked like a player that maybe is just a wee bit burnt out and frustrated. Like, he was getting serious attention from the Armagh defenders. I was watching it as they all came in, pushing, nipping, dragging, pulling. That does probably wear you down after a while, and it just got to the extent that he was like, feck this, I'm just done getting kicked and pulled and dragged and punched. And when there was nobody else there to step up and get Kerry over the line, it just wasn't in the legs for him. It was unfortunate, but as you say, he's 25, he's a career ahead of him, never mind having a career played, but there was just something definitely just wasn't right there on Saturday evening, unfortunately, for Kerry and David.
Well, you mentioned about one All-Ireland in the 7 years. It's, Maurice Fitzgerald went through a career, and he started off his career one of the great Kerry players. And I was talking to Dara Kennedy, we were talking about great Kerry players, and Dara puts Maurice Fitzgerald at number 1 for skill and for what he could do with a ball. And, there was no one greater on the ball than Maurice. But he won. It was 10 years before he won his first All-Ireland, came in 88, 1997, and he only won 2, and he won the second one as a sub. So careers for the great, or All-Irelands for the great Kerry players, in that respect, it doesn't automatically happen that you have one of the great players. But obviously what Maurice did in 1997 was probably reflective of David Clifford in 2022 as well.
It'll be interesting, as you say, is this an inflection point? Does he maybe take a little time off from club duties to re-energise himself ahead of next year? It will be interesting. Colm, you mentioned the crowd earlier, and I thought your piece in today's Irish Independent was very interesting, reading Jack O'Connor's comments, but also your statistic about Kerry playing on Saturdays since 2005. They've lost 5 out of 6 games, and I think you said maybe delayed kick-off time. It's difficult to get up from Kerry in that regard, but it's not a great record on a Saturday evening. So when those fixtures came out, some Kerry supporters might not have been too happy. But what did you make of, I suppose, Jack O'Connor's comments and just the influence overall that the real vociferous, passionate Armagh crowd had on the influence of the game?
I think it had an influence, and you can only sense it. I mean, looking at it from our vantage point, you sense it in the crowd. Do the players? I'm sure they do. That in the key moments, Shane Ryan drops the ball, that goal goes in, and the place erupts, and then Rian O'Neill kicks that point off the throw in from the penalised kick out. Just the noise levels, and at every turn, once they get in, even some of the turnovers, the Armagh crowd were really, really letting their voice. And I did think it was quite pointed that into the first question and nearly the second or third sentence, Jack had referenced the crowd. Now, who are we to say, you should be coming up from Kerry 4-hour round or 8-hour round trips, and, the accommodation prices and all of that comes into the mix as to why Kerry people wouldn't come in. But I did make the point that I'm sure they came from Gweedore and Glencolmkill and everywhere else from Donegal. And I know there's a certain novelty about Donegal travelling, but Donegal have travelled to a lot of games. You do not see that mobilisation of Kerry for such a for the county that it is, you don't see it, and I obviously respect it's a long way up, but it's just as difficult for, say, Donegal to get to Croke Park, and in some respects maybe even more, because the roads from the northwest are not great. So I made all that point in there that the crowd definitely made a difference when that game was in the melting pot. Now, granted, Kerry could have killed the game several times during the second half. Obviously, Tom O'Sullivan's second goal chance in particular would have put them 7 points up. And even at the end, they were, after Aidan Nugent lost the ball in the corner and it came down to the last 4 minutes of added time, you're coming down to the last minute of that added time, and Kerry are on the attack. And I felt Dylan Gainey probably wasn't in the best position to take that snatch shot. Okay, he had scored one earlier, but I think they could have showed another bit of patience, maybe another 20, 30 seconds. I think it was coming close to the 4 minutes, but work it to the next man. I thought that was the better option. They could have killed the game there too. Whether they deserved it in the overall scheme of things, I just don't think so.
And Dick, to go back to Armagh for a second, Kieran McGeeney, it's probably the statement victory of his managerial career for sure, and arguably Armagh's greatest win since they beat Kerry in the 2002 All-Ireland final in some ways. What does it do for him, his managerial legacy, I suppose? I know there's one big game still to come, but this was a great day for him personally after, into year 10. You don't often get that amount of time before you can get your signature win.
Yeah, you're right. Enough about Kerry, because it would be unfair to focus on Kerry's deficiencies on the day, because at the end of the day, there's plenty of big teams get to semi-finals and maybe don't bring their best stuff and they still get over the line because the team on the other side doesn't grasp the opportunity. Armagh did. And there was a few pivotal points, like Rian O'Neill kicked a point. I think Armagh had gone 5 down, and they could have shipped a few goals before that, and it looked like this game sort of could get away from them fairly quickly. Ray O'Neill hadn't really been in the game. He hadn't scored from play, I think, in the first half, and was sort of peripheral. And then he kicked a sort of a typical Rian O'Neill point, if you remember it, Colm out on the Hogan stand, and it brought them back to 4. Bit of a lift. And some people maybe don't like the whole fist pumping and waving to the crowd, but that's very much around this Armagh team. And Stephen Campbell then, about 5 minutes later, done a wee bit more. And I think they started getting a bit of energy from that. They just sort of threw the shackles off a wee bit and said, to hell with it, boys, we have to go out and play here. And then they got the fortuitous goal, but you make your own luck as well. Barry McCambridge was very brave, leaving David Clifford, which he did. If you actually look at the footage, he left him almost on his own and pushed forward. Like, that ball could have easily broke down and he could have got goosed on the counter-attack. He was brave. He got foot forward. And that was really how the game then played out. Now, they could have easily, because I think they should have comfortably won it in normal time. They were by far the stronger team, and they sort of tightened up a wee bit as well and could have lost it if Kerry had been able to close it out. But I think they just got brave. Like, Aidan Forker stood up, kicked a point. Charlie O'Burns, they started kicking points that you need to, if you want to go and win a game like that. You can't be having to sort of overly construct everything, and trust your own talent and natural instincts, which O'Neill and Charlie Og and Aidan Forker done. And as I said last week in the podcast, if they went out, we're brave, and with that Kerry, you have to tip their hat. And as a manager and a group of players, like, has there ever been a team at this stage that shows that they are willing to go through a brick wall for their manager like this group of Armagh? You can see it after the match. Like, they are such a tight unit, having gone through so many tough defeats over the last sort of 10 years up and down. Like, they would just do anything for McGeeney, and you can see that the way that they're conditioned and the effort that they put in. And it's just a huge credit to them. And if you're an Armagh supporter, what a team to follow, because I think they have a lot of average footballers playing at their peak of themselves, which is again a huge credit to the manager, squeezing everything out of themselves in terms of defence and their ability to if nothing else have an impact on the game, but to minimise the impact of their opposite marker. And that was something that Monaghan sort of done a lot around. When sometimes you're maybe a wee bit limited against the tier 1 opposition, you compete. You compete first and foremost and stand your ground. Armagh done that, and they deserve huge credit for it.
Kieran McGeeney
mentioned that Rian O'Neill point, and it was a very, very crucial one, because I'm just looking at the notes here. It brought it back to 4 points from 5, and he curled it in from the Hogan stand side, and that's a real signature Rian O'Neill score, because he did it against Galway, a very, very similar angle as well. So he has that. He has such a range of shots. And you're right, Dick, he wasn't great in the first half. He did get a first half point, but he really, really took the game to Kerry in the second half, and those 2 points, and obviously the catch at the end, moment of defiance. I mean, it really was. That stood out too. But agreed, Dick, with where Armagh have really maximised everything out of themselves, and I think there's probably a bit to go in them as well. I think they didn't do everything perfect, and far from it. Last Saturday, and there were plenty of mistakes, but they really have. There's no great underage footprint of success in Armagh, like other counties. They haven't been, accumulating even Ulster underage titles or anything like that. And even Crossmaglen wouldn't be the power base team that they once were in Ulster. There are obviously that's shifted to Derry and with Kilcoo and all of that in Ulster. So to get a team and to bring together a squad like that and get so much out of them, and we've probably made this point before. I know I've made it before, that you never hear of Armagh players leaving the squad for whatever reason. Jarlath O'Byrne obviously left after last year, but he was back, and look at the impact he made in extra time. You just don't hear of that in Kieran McGeeney teams, in Kieran McGeeney's squads. So he's able to keep players, and you would expect that there would be some fracture when players aren't getting game time. And you look even in Kerry early this year, Micheál Burns left, and players leave even the best squads. But in Armagh, when you would think they're not, they haven't had any tangible success in terms of titles or anything like that, but he's kept them together and got a lot out of them, and a very, very competitive team. Tactically astute, I think, in the way that they developed their play as the game progressed, with certain attacking formations that they were able to bring to it, create the space to get shots away. So very methodical at times. And as I mentioned earlier, they've introduced a level of pace that has just lifted their game up.
And another thing that I think has added to them, and it's something that other teams should cop on to, that the teams that get to All-Ireland finals, win All-Irelands, how they use their goalkeeper. Like, you remember there's a few years there when Ethan Rafferty was playing outfield for them. I think that didn't add anything to Armagh's style of play, because he becomes this safety net and he's an option outfield, that the ball keeps getting recycled back, and that slowed down their play, and they were very average at times. Even though people might have talked about the impact Ethan Rafferty is no, let the 2 to 15 do the outfield play, and if you're good enough to wear a jersey out the pitch, get it. He was just doing his job very well as a keeper. He was excellent on the kickouts, and let the boys out the field play the football. And it's no coincidence that Galway as well, by and large, let the outfield players play the football, and Stephen Cluxon before them. And I think that is definitely it. I always thought Armagh were a better team without Ethan Rafferty coming out, because I think it's a distraction to them, because they play better on the front foot with intensity and having that goalkeeper. And I've seen that with Monaghan at times, with Rory Beggan. It slows them down and becomes very lateral, because it's too easy to keep ball and throw the ball with a +1 with the keeper coming out. They've taken that out of their game, and they just get on with it. And I think that's definitely added to them. And that was probably by chance, because Ethan Rafferty got injured and had to find a replacement for him. And I think they're a better team for it.
And just on their tactical astuteness, the Colm mentioned Kieran McGeeney after the game. Gave a lot of credit to Kieran Donaghy. Obviously, his presence in the backroom team must have been an interesting day for him, getting a victory over his own county. We might move on to the other game then, Colm. Galway Donegal yesterday. Galway winning 114 to 15 points. It was 114, I think, or 111 to 14 points with 6 or 7 minutes to go, and then Galway kind of kicked for home from there. I think Donegal had 1 point after the 48th minute, having shot the lights out up to that point. What was the winning of the game for you ultimately?
I think Galway's experience of being down the track 2 years ago and being involved in an All-Ireland semi-final then, and getting to a final and going so close. And it's a seasoned Galway team, and a physical Galway team, and it's no coincidence that the two most physical teams, the two biggest teams perhaps, and I include Dublin in that as well. But for now, Galway and Armagh have reached the final. I thought that physical edge just about made a difference. And the surprising thing for me, Will, was I felt Donegal flagged. That's one scenario I did not see coming, was that Donegal would run out of legs, and they ran out of ideas. But you run out of ideas when you run out of legs. And I mentioned in the piece I wrote today, I thought symptomatic of that was Michael Langan's shot. He had kicked 4 really, really polished shots, points before that. And it came to around the 70th, 71st minute. And it was the shot of a tired player. And it went so far wide that had he tried, he wouldn't have kicked it any further wide. And he had kicked some supreme points before that. And I think Jim McGuinness, and he acknowledged it afterwards, he was surprised too that the team had flagged. And we sometimes choose what way to look at this, but Donegal over the last 4 weeks had Clare and Louth. Galway had Armagh, Monaghan. That was a tight game in Salt Hill until the end, and then they beat Dublin. So it was a completely different route. Now, if we flip that, maybe we'd be saying the opposite. We're great for that. But it looked like they were more battle hardened. And I think both managers accepted that afterwards, that, Galway's more competitive route in the last 4 weeks probably made the difference in the end. And for some reason, and it's something Donegal will look at, how did they lose energy after being so energetic for so long in the last quarter, that they only scored a Michael Langan point, a terrific point from 45 metres. But you look back at Unsung Galway's free that would have put them a point ahead. Difficult enough angle, but from 13 metres or around that, you're expecting that to be scored. And Unsung Galway had a very, very good game for them, obviously, up to that. But you feel that's a pivotal moment too.
Dick, what stood out to you about Galway's win?
I think over the course of the 70 plus minutes, the subtle different styles in play had a cumulative effect on those energy levels that Colm touched on. Like, by and large, I think Donegal went short because they were given the short kick out, to retain possession. Galway, by comparison, went long with quite a few. Now, that might seem sort of not a big deal, but the energy, especially very warm, like it was very, very close, heavy day in Croke Park, or all weekends it was. Like, you're asking your cornerbacks and your halfbacks to do all the ball carrying up on that sod time and time again, and also then to defend. It's a big ask. And I think just Galway having that bit of an outlet that they were able to gain possession. There's enough stats knocking about there. I think the Sunday game covered it well. The amount of scores Galway got from just being a bit more direct. Like, if you think of the energy that goes into that score versus the energy that Donegal had to put in a lot of their scores in terms of the moving the ball up through the feet or through the hands, and then the recycling. They were all great scores, but there's only so much is in the legs of any players. And I think just over the course of the 70 minutes, that played a significant part. And even Galway's willingness at times to just let ball in on top of the square. And you could see that Dylan McHugh coming from Corofin, the way they like to play, you could see him head up, scanning all the time. He was really, there was probably times he had to hold himself back because he just knew it was too speculative, but there was a willingness for them to play a wee bit more direct. And I think over the balance of play, that was significant. I think probably Jim will reflect on that. He's surprised his team got tired. Well, if you play a certain way for so long, there's only so much energy, there's only so much fuel in the tank, and the way they played versus how Galway played ultimately left them blowing on fumes for the last 5-10 minutes.
And Colm, I've thought Padraig Joyce's comments about, as he mentioned, Colm, Armagh's depth earlier, and Padraig Joyce said he feels a massive difference between this year and 2022 and their run to the final then was that Galway have a lot more options because, Shane Walsh, I think, had 1 point from play. Damien Colm, I don't think, scored from play. Like, they're their two main attacking forces, and were pretty well bottled up for the most part by Donegal, and yet, Rob Finnerty came to the fore and some other players. That must have been a very pleasing aspect for Galway as well.
I'd imagine it was, if you were to suggest beforehand that, Shane Walsh, Damien Comer, Killian McDade wouldn't be on the pitch at the end, and that Sean Kelly wouldn't have played at all, and that Comer and Walsh and McDade between them would only score 2 points from play, and the impact that they had while they did make some good interventions, it wouldn't have been what you would think would be required from them to beat Donegal in an All-Ireland semi-final. So that puts the emphasis on, well, where else was it? And Dick mentioned Dylan McHugh. I think he's a front runner right now for Footballer of the Year. I think he's been superb, cutting in, making those incisions off the right wing. he gives and he goes. He's creating openings. He's got a nice bit of pace without looking, that he's explosively fast. But he has a glide, and he just has a glide in him coming off that wing that is really, really, they're getting so much out of it. And the other player that has really stepped up this year, and to a degree last year, but this year, is John Maher. And he brings such a physical presence, and he's getting in and making tackles, and he's digging ball out, and he's getting forward, and he's popping a point over from game to game, and he's full of energy, and he's full of endeavour around the pitch, and he's a type of player that is, he really brings it to opponents. He makes life difficult for opponents out around the middle. So those two players have really. Liam Silk obviously had a very good game. He was picking up Unsung Galway, but going forward, he got 2 points, and he's an oasis of calm playing for Galway. And then Rob Finnerty, and in addition to the 2 points, he kept one in along the end line, put it back to Killian McDade, and that's a point. But ultimately, even the small things, Matthew Tierney running across the line of vision for Sean Patton, that counted. Making that run counted. That ball was popping into Sean Patton at the last minute in his eye line. He sees Matthew Tierney coming across. He thinks he's going to get it, and he doesn't. Tierney doesn't touch it, and Patton is committed to Tierney touching it, and the ball goes in. So all of those things, those small things, counted. But for me, there's more unsung heroes for Galway this year that have been doing it in a way that maybe we wouldn't have expected.
Yeah, and Dick, I take your point about Donegal flagging, and it does feel like Galway, the better team, did win. But when you look back at the statistics, like Donegal were 10 from 14 scoring chances in the first half, only 5 out of 14 in the second half. The Unsung Galway and Frida Colm mentioned, that was a draw game with 5 or 6 minutes to go, and that goes wide. Like, we could still very easily, I think, be sitting here with Donegal in the All-Ireland final, in so much as Galway did kick on at the end. Donegal still had so many chances and didn't take them, and it could be them playing Armagh rather than Galway. I think not a whole pile would have had to have changed.
Absolutely. Like, it's very easy for us to sit here post match and sort of reverse engineer why things went the way they did, because the finest of margins. That being said, I'm struggling to think, Colm, you can correct me on this, how many genuine goal chances did Donegal have in the game? Like, did they like going up to Croke Park? They were saying goals win games, and you have to create, or at least attempt to. You talk about Matthew Tierney. Yeah, okay, it was a bit fortuitous, but he was in there. That ball could have easily just broke. He could have easily just caught that ball with the run that he made, Colm, and just buried it to the net. Do you know what I mean? He was there. He was making the run. He was showing the endeavour to be in the goal mouth area. Not sure we've seen a lot of that from Donegal by comparison.
There was one chance, perhaps, Dick, early on. Shane O'Donnell got a point out of, and it wasn't. It was a half chance, and maybe it was even less than a half chance. But that's been a reflection of Galway all year. They have not been giving up goal chances, and actually Armagh hadn't, apart from the 2 goals against Down, until last Saturday, when they obviously conceded the goal, and Tom O'Sullivan had those 2 chances. But Galway have not been giving up goal chances to any team, really. There might have been one in the Monaghan game at one stage as well, but they've only conceded the 1 goal, and that's been to a short kick out that was intercepted up in Sligo.
That's right.
And Kieran Kelly scored a goal. They went long with most of their kickouts yesterday. My count was 21 out of 22 they retained. They retained some breaks as well. But no, you're right. Goal chances against this Galway team have been at a premium, and in the last 10 minutes, you could really see they really had a very, very solid, organised shell there, and you just sensed Donegal are not getting in here. Hence the Langan shot, and hence some of the snatch shots from Pater Morgan, even, who's been so good for them all year.
Yeah.
They just retained that solid defensive shell. A player like Sean Fitzgerald, who has come in there, and you think maybe, he might be vulnerable first year, but he's been very solid too. And Johnny McGrath, I mentioned unsung heroes. I actually left him out. He's been so consistent, picking up some of the best players in the game and dealing with them and not conceding too much ground to them. So
yeah, and I think that when you talk about those, but think about that point, Colm. I think Jim McGuinness made reference to it in his post-match interview. The fact that Galway left 2 or 3 forwards up front. So you think about that, they sort of stretched their team out. They were playing long kickouts, which throws a bit of an element of chance in terms of, but yet they were so solid at the back. Like, that's actually sort of counterintuitive to modern day, best coaching, where you need to keep everybody back, 15 men behind the ball, keep it tight. Galway are achieving better results defensively by not doing that, by pulling the teams out, and that's a sign of great coaching, great confidence in the individuals to do their man-to-man jobs and not be dependent on 3 or 4 men blocking out the space, and trusting each other. Trusting, the keeper, and trusting the Paul Conrays. And as you said, John Marrick, somebody on Twitter last night, said it was the best performance from a 56-year-old in Croke Park for a long time, because he looks so unorthodox. He looks like a player that shouldn't be getting around the park the way that he does. He's a wee bit strongly built, but the effort, the miles and touches and possessions that he put in there was absolutely phenomenal. But that's just a team trusting their players in their positions to play the positions as they should be. Midfielders.
If you look at the, you have Conroy and Maher midfield, and then you have Tierney, Matthew Tierney, Cian Darcy, Killian McDade. Killian McDade is probably in height wise, he's conceding inches to the others, but that's an extremely big quintet between half forwards, midfielders around that middle eight. So they won a lot of breaks, and they won it by sheer force of will when they brought them. But Matthew Tierney was very good under some of the kickouts as well, and they got scores off them. So it suits them to go long, because first of all, primary, they have a good chance decent chance of winning, but also their ability to win breaks, and McHugh was able to come on and win them as well. And so that's I think it suits them to go long all round. I'm not so sure Conor Gleeson is the most confident going short, but he delivered them very well yesterday, and I think the statistics prove that.
Yeah, by comparison, I know you might want to come in here, Will, but go back to the famous game at the start of the year for Donegal against Derry. Look at how they dominated the middle third. They went long. They had that tactic to sort of, commit bodies to the break and break long. We see none of that, because arguably they probably played that hand a wee bit too soon. Galway were never going to get caught for that type of play by Donegal. So that was a massive tool of their armoury that was sort of just ripped out. They were far too strong around the middle, but also they weren't committing bodies needlessly. They had a much more, dare say it, a traditional approach to their type of play, even with a plenty of the modern day game blended in. And I think that's why Galway, for me, are the favourites, because they just have that bit of a traditional blue-blooded feel about them, and a wee bit more sort of in the legs in terms of experience and ability, right from 1 to 15 and beyond.
Yeah, just before I might get your thoughts on initial thoughts on the final matchup, I was just going to come in on the Donegal, or the lack of goal chances. In the 7 games they played after the Derry goal blitz, when they hit 4, they were held goalless in 5 of the 7 matches, and scored 2 goals against Clare in the last round robin game and 1 goal against Louth. So they have really struggled for goals generally since that opening kind of win up in Derry. Colm, just before we get your thoughts on Galway Armagh, just to reflect on Donegal and their season, like what a journey it was from where they were when Jim McGuinness first came back in. Do you think there's a growth level similar to what he achieved last year? Like, will our Donegal be All-Ireland contenders next year, do you think? Do they have that kind of scope to get back to this stage and potentially win the All-Ireland?
I think they're in the pack, and it's a very congested pack right now, without projecting too far forward. Obviously, there's an All-Ireland final between 2 teams that are unbeaten. We should say that, are unbeaten in regulation play this year. Obviously, Armagh's only defeat was to Donegal in the Ulster final on penalties. So they've been very consistent, both these teams. But you'll also have, I would imagine, a regenerated Derry, Dublin, Kerry, Mayo. Who knows, with the talent in Tyrone, can they make that leap? So there are teams, and there's not much between any of them, I don't think. So Donegal are among that pack for sure. Can they make an advance in the same way as 2012? Well, I'd mention one name, Michael Murphy, and he's absent from the squad. And I couldn't help thinking, had he been on the pitch for the last 20 minutes and, taking over that O'Sheen Gallen free, that's over the bar. And you just wonder, you wonder now, and he's very happy sitting up on level 7 beside us in the commentary gantry and all of that. But I just wonder, had he been there for those, maybe to come off the bench the last 20 minutes in a game like that, to bring some order, just to bring something different. What a player between 2011 and 2012, and you remember his All-Ireland final. He's just a really special player. I think Donegal can probably improve. Whether they can improve to be All-Ireland champions, I wouldn't be certain. I probably wasn't certain in 2011 either, by the way, Will. There's no point in me being revisionist and saying I could see that. I couldn't. But Jim McGuinness has a pathway there before to make that improvement. The one difference is, as I mentioned, Michael Murphy, and they may just be short without a player of his stature.
The one issue, going back to Jim's first tenure, was the sustainability of his approach and style of play. Like, I know he puts a huge onus on conditioning and fitness, and that reared its head a few times in Jim's first pass. That's hard to maintain. Hard to just have the energy levels necessary to deploy the type of play that he plays, and even players themselves sometimes break down with injuries. And can Ryan McHugh put in another winter? Like, he's a lot of time spent, and one of those players that's very key to their style of play. Paddy McBrearty as well. They probably put a huge effort individually to get back up to the levels that they need to be. There'd be a question mark there whether they can come back again. I think there's a bit of a ceiling there with them, and I think, but at the same time, I think that there's enough to be said there, because Dublin and Kerry and everyone else there's not a big separation now from the team, so they could easily get to another All-Ireland semi-final and compete. But equally, there's enough teams further back that could take them out. I think they'll do well to retain Ulster. There's a target on their back now, and whether they can find another player or two up front to give them that sort of goal threat that you ultimately need to win in Croke Park and win the big games. They need to find that. But listen, huge. We're clutching at straws here. We've been a bit harsh. Massive strides gained for Donegal from where they were, and huge credit to McGuinness and the players for getting their shoulder behind the wheel. But
and I think what they got out of
a stretch,
what they got out of the improvement in players like Pater Morgan, Oisin Gallen, even Jason McGee. He missed the last few games. He played yesterday, coming back off an injury, but in the earlier part of the season, he was really good for them. So Jim McGuinness has got so much out of these players in year one, and maybe another year can bring that improvement. But I feel they really have, they've got so much out of them this year. Shane O'Donnell, they just improved so much. You wonder, as you mentioned about the ceiling, well, how much more can they improve? I suppose experience will count.
Michael Murphy's 34. He's not old by even modern Gaelic football standards. You just wonder how persuasive Jimmy McGuinness might be to get one more pull out of him, because, as you said, what a man to pull off the bench for the last 20 minutes. We'll see.
Yeah, it might have been easier to say no at the end of, or at the start of this year, when he didn't know the possibilities. Having seen what came in here, maybe he could have his arm twisted. So that'll be.
I wouldn't think he would change at this stage. I couldn't see it if he didn't bow to the persuasion of Jim McGuinness back last winter at any stage. And I'm sure there was a lot of pressure put on, but he's made his mind up now. He's 2 seasons out. I would say no.
Well, you never know. Let's see. We'll follow that in the off season anyway. Just to finish up, guys, I got to you, Dick, first. Like, what's your initial kind of thoughts on the final matchup? They've obviously played in a round robin this year. It was a draw. They played last year. Armagh won by a point. They played the year before. It went to penalties and Galway won. So they've had 3 really hotly contested, exciting, entertaining games. Hopefully we get that in 2 weeks' time. But who do you think initially has the edge?
I think Galway, but more than the semi-final predictions, I wouldn't put an iota of my own money on it. I think just there's a sense of momentum with them. I think the way that they've dealt with the injuries and trying to manage panels has brought other players up that now is propping up the team, and they're not dependent on the Shane Walshes and the Comers. I think they'll be better for the final. I think Shane Walsh was taken off before he was probably done himself any damage, and I think Comer will prove. I'm not sure Sean Kelly, is he gone for the year, or is there a potential that now?
I think there's a chance he can come
3
back.
or 4 weeks.
Boris Joyce certainly said that 2 weeks will
help him. Yeah, so I think they'll be they're trending as they have been over the last 4 or 5 weeks. They're continuing to trend upwards in terms of their ceiling, and I think there's even more in Galway than we've seen to date. And I think they've just a very balanced team, from keeper right into corner forward, and the subs that they have. I think Galway, there's just an element of chaos. Armagh, there's an element of chaos there that no team likes. There's raw talent in the likes of Rian O'Neill and Stephen Campbell off the bench and Charlie O'Burns that they need to find that for 70 minutes, not just the sort of the last 20 odd minutes and extra time that they got against a sort of a flailing Kerry. You'd have to think Galway, having lost 1-2 years ago with John O'Mahony and the emotion and everything that's been through, you'd have to think that they're favourites to pick one up. And been completely objective about it, you'd have to say that you would love to see Galway win it. I think those players have done enough and almost deserve an All-Ireland. Sport doesn't work like that, and I think Armagh, they don't do sentiment. They'll be looking to upset the traditional story, the people we're looking for from Galway. But it's a great intrigue. There's all again like that bit of traditional blue blood with Galway, and that term that Jack O'Connor used about the sort of the upstarty Novu Riche in Armagh. So it's a great contrast for what'll be a great and colourful final.
Yeah, especially given their recent meetings have been so good. Colm, I'll give you the last word then. Who do you think is the initial advantage?
I think it's been a great rivalry between these two teams over the last 3 years. Obviously, we remember their Croke Park quarter final and all the controversy, but what a great game and drama there was in that. And it went right down to the wire in Carrick-on-Shannon a year later. Actually, you mentioned Sean Kelly. He was terrific in that game. Picked up an injury in that game, and I'm not sure has he been right since. Is it the same injury? Obviously, but since then he was so good in that game. But Armagh came late with a late free to win that game, and that changed the dynamic of the group. This year, Galway were ahead by 5 points. They were in a very strong position, and then that goal, the only goal they've conceded, put Armagh back in. Now Armagh still had to come late to get an equaliser that day, so it's a very, very close rivalry. But I do feel in 2 of the 3 games, and maybe even in Carrick-on-Shannon, that Galway just have had the measure of them, even if the results haven't reflected so much. You don't know what that win over Kerry is going to do for Armagh, though. It could really bring them on another level. Beating Kerry is great fuel, just as it was for Dublin to beat Galway. So they come in with a lot of similarities from their pathways, and obviously there's form there to suggest it's going to be an extremely close game. After regulation time, there's been 2 draws and a winner from a free right at the end. And Shane Walsh had a chance in Carrick-on-Shannon to equal it. So that's how close they are. And that's how close I expect that to be. Give Galway a slight edge. Just the lack of concession of goal chances and goals, obviously. Just give them a slight edge. And there's always that possibility that Comer and perhaps Walsh will step up again as they're capable of. That possibility is there.
Well, it's certainly evenly poised at this juncture, and if the game is half as good as the 2 semi-finals we had over the weekend, we'll have plenty of drama in 2 weeks' time. I'd like to thank Colm and Dick for joining me on this week's episode of the Throne Football Podcast. We will be back next week with another show looking ahead to that Galway versus Armagh game. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or listen on the Irish Independent website. So until next time, thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.